For hundreds of years, Jewish scholars have questioned the location of Solomon's temple on Mount Moriah. Many suggestions have been offered. Some have thought the temple was located to the south of the Dome of the Rock, some to the west of the Dome of the Rock, some to the north of the Dome of the Rock. And there are some who have suggested that the temple was situated on the rock that now stands under the Dome of the Rock. Finally, in 1992 and again this year, the question is now settled. Not only where the Temple of Solomon stood, but the Ark of the Covenant as well. The very location, the very spot where the Ark of the Covenant stood in the Holy of Holies. Now settled. We're going to talk about it on today's Prophecy in the News. Gary Stimman is here.
And the gentleman who has thrown more light on the subject than anyone else in the world is Leen Ritmeyer. He's an Englishman, actually, and he is an archaeologist of great experience who has been on digs for many, many years in and around Jerusalem, particularly focusing on the Temple Mount area. And JR, he's working on his PhD at the University of Manchester in England on the Temple Mount. And what we are going to be talking about today, in fact, we'll be referring to both the March-April 1992 and the January-February 1996 issues of Biblical Archaeological Review, commonly called BAR magazine. Now, we can't supply the magazine to you, but your local bookstore can help you out on that. And if you want the back issues, they're available from BAR. JR, this is tremendously exciting because what we're talking about is the most important piece of land on the face of the planet, the Temple Mount, and Leen Ritmeyer has excavated around the Temple Mount. Of course, yes, politics don't allow going up there, but he has worked to establish the location of Solomon's temple, and he's done it.
Yeah. You know, in 1983, Asher Kaufman, who is a physics professor at Hebrew University, suggested that the temple was located to the north of the Dome of the Rock, over an area today called the Dome of the Spirits, a small cupola that lays about 300 feet north of the Muslim mosque. But that could not possibly have been the place. I don't know why Asher Kaufman suggested that. He did a lot of research on it, but it turns out that it just didn't hold water. Ritmeyer has found the location after all these years. You know, I have said in the past on programs that the Jews think that they're going to have to wait for the Messiah to come to tell them where to build a temple.
Yeah. And
now at last, they know where to build a temple, which creates a tremendous political problem.
Yeah, back in March, April 1992, BAR magazine published an article by Leen Ritmeyer in which he defined a 500 cubit square on the Temple Mount, referred to in a Jewish writing called Midot. And J.R. Midot 2:1 clearly talks about Solomon's temple having been built upon a 500 cubit square. It was called a birah. And archaeologists have wondered, what in the world is a birah? Well, Leen Ritmeyer found it. He located it. He incontrovertibly laid it out, measured it, and his publication has been received, by the way, with, I think, unanimity. I don't think anyone's arguing with him, and now he's taken the second step. Yes. Because not only has he located the birah, the 500 cubit foot square, which is still there to be measured today, even the cardinal directions, nothing has shifted for 3,000 years. Not only is this the big square there, but now there is the ultimate landmark upon that square.
Which, in the final conclusion, says that the rock under the Dome of the Rock was actually the spot of the Holy of Holies. And we want to show you how this all fits together on today's Prophecy in the News. Let's begin by the measurement of the eastern wall. Ritmeyer started just north of the eastern gate, where some Phoenician stones stop and Herodian stones begin. Solomon used Phoenician stonemasons, and these few Phoenician stones were the remains of Solomon's eastern wall, his the built-up part where he builds up the pointed top to lay it out 500 foot square. So he starts there and goes south along the eastern wall, and he found 500 cubits down the wall bends. And that's the place where the Hasmoneans increased the wall or added to the wall going south. Yeah. So here he has found Solomon's original wall.
And when the Hasmoneans added to Solomon's original wall to make it longer, their stonework was slightly off because the actual original 500 cubit square is there to be measured 3.5 degrees east of true north, a perfect square. And so he was able to mark the eastern wall at 500 cubits. These cubits, by the way, are the royal cubit of 20.67 inches, 20.67 inches, which is works out in English measurement to 861 feet. Mm-hmm. Naturally, having established that square, J.R., he's thinking, all right, now we know where that is.
Yes, and to find the western side of this 500 cubit square, he went 500 cubits to the west, and right at the northwestern corner of the Muslim platform, there is a staircase. The bottom step of that staircase goes in a different direction than the rest of the steps on that staircase. Mm-hmm. It parallels perfectly the eastern wall, and it has to be a part of that original Solomon's wall that he built in order to make his 500 square cubit Barah.
Yeah, beautiful story. It's one of the great stories, and as I say, that was published first, I think, in America in the BAR magazine of March, April 1992. Now, he did that work, and he also dug through historical documents that said, now that we have the Birah, the platform, the 500 cubit square platform, he then nailed down the location of Solomon's temple on that platform.
He cites a statement by Flavius Josephus, a first century Jewish historian, who writes in his voluminous account, this one called The Wars of the Jews, chapter 5, "At first the plain at the top was hardly sufficient for the holy house and the altar, for the ground about it was very uneven and like a precipice. But when King Solomon, who was the person that built the temple, had built a wall on its east side, there was then added one cloister founded on a bank cast up for it, and on the other parts the holy house stood. In the future ages, people added new banks." And of course, that would be the Hasmonean addition, and Nehemiah and Ezra's additions in rebuilding the wall as well. And it goes on to say, when they had built the walls on three sides, the temple round about from the bottom of the hill, and performed a work that was greater than could be hoped for. Also, in Josephus' Antiquities of the Jews, he writes this concerning the building of Solomon's temple: "The hill was a rocky ascent that declined by degrees toward the east parts of the city till it came to an elevated level. This hill it was which Solomon, who was the first of our kings by divine revelation, encompassed with a wall. It was of excellent workmanship upwards and round the top of it. He also built a wall below, beginning at the bottom, which compassed by a deep valley." And he says, this hill was walled all around, encompassed of 4 furlongs, the distance of each angle containing in length a furlong, or about 500 cubits in length. And so the temple itself was built at the very top of the hill. Well, it's obvious to see where the top of the hill is.
Yes, perfectly obvious, because it turns out to be a rock. And actually, it's a pinnacle. Would be the best name for it, because it's living rock. That is, it's the topmost part, the highest part of the mountain. And that mountain really dates back, I believe, to the days of Abraham. It's mentioned in 1 Chronicles 21 as the threshing floor of Ornan. And it originally started out as a threshing floor, and today lies just beneath the dome of the rock, which the Muslims claim is the place of ascension, where Muhammad ascended to heaven. But J.R., that rock, it's called es-Sakkra today, under the dome of the rock, is actually the old threshing floor of Ornan.
In fact, the account is given in 1 Chronicles chapter 21, verses 19 through 22. "And the angel of the Lord commanded Gad to say to David that David should go up and set up an altar unto the Lord in the threshing floor of Ornan the Jebusite. And David went up, saying of Gad, which he spake in the name of the Lord. And Ornan turned back and saw the angel and his 4 sons with him hid themselves. Now Ornan was threshing wheat. Here we have the threshing floor that David bought. And it's a fascinating account. Ornan possibly had the cavern under this rock for a storage bin for his grain. And we'll talk about that when we return in just a moment. Under the dome of the rock stands a stone, the es-Sakkra, the rock upon which Ornan had his threshing floor in the days of the Bible. The Bible tells us that King David bought that threshing floor to build an altar there to worship God at the request of God himself. And over the centuries then, that became the very spot where the Jewish temples were built. Solomon built his temple there, and later Herod the Great built the second temple that stood in the days of Christ. This unusual rock has a cavern underneath it. Leen Ritmeyer suggests that the Crusaders built that cavern for a place of veneration, a place for lighting candles, and that they put a hole or a chimney in the top of that cellar that is seen today venting out through the rock under the dome of the rock. However, in the days of Ornan, such a cavern could have been used to help him in his threshing floor. Up there on the top of the hill, the grain would be beaten and then tossed, and the wind would carry the chaff away, the grain would fall. Then they could just easily sweep the grain down into that hole and store the grain in the cavern. And it's very possible that that hole has been there, and that cellar has been there ever since the days of Ornan when David bought the threshing floor.
It's a little bit of interesting history, and to continue that history, of course, after the destruction of the temple in AD 70, the Romans built a temple of Jupiter over that location. And then later on, that was torn down. In 691 AD, the dome was built over the rock, covered with gold, beaten gold, and has stood there, JR, for 1,305 years to this day. And has literally ended up protecting what may be the most significant landmark on the face of the planet. Now, what's interesting to me, JR, is this. When you see a photograph of Jerusalem, and you very often do in newspapers, magazines, virtually always you'll see the Dome of the Rock in the middle of the photograph. It's just synonymous with Jerusalem. There's that Dome of the Rock, but not until very recently have we known what lies directly under the center of the Dome of the rock called es-Sakkra. And the rock has a hole in it. It's probably, what, 2 feet in diameter, something like that?
Just about 3 feet, actually.
Is it 3 feet in diameter? And that hole has been there. It's called the Well of Souls by the Arabs, but it may be significant in a lot of ways.
In my opinion, the Crusaders could not have dug that cellar and made that hole in the rock, because in the 4th century, around the year 325 to 350, a pilgrim from Bordeaux went to Jerusalem, and he wrote, quote, that there was a, quote, perforated stone to which the Jews come every year and anoint it and bewail themselves with groans and rend their garments and so depart. Here it is, written in the 4th century, that the stone was a perforated stone. So I feel that that cavern under the stone has been there perhaps even since Ornan.
It may be that old, by the way. And I'm going to put a picture up beside you here. This is a picture which we'll get on the screen for you of the actual view looking down on es-Sakkra beneath the Dome of the Rock. This is the rock, and you might point out, JR, that hole that's been bored right into the floor. It goes down into a cavern.
Located right there. And the cavern, of course, is under this area.
Under the rock. And you have another spot on the rock which marks the center point of the dome itself that was used to lay out the circle of the dome.
That would be this trapezoidal area carved out of the stone right here.
Right. And then just to the north of that trapezoidal area, there is a rectangle cut neatly into the rock.
And it's easy to see right here. It happens to be the exact width and length of the Ark of the Covenant.
Now the story gets interesting.
Yes.
Of the Ark of the Covenant.
Yes. Leen Ritmeyer noted this area right here to the south. It's about 10 feet wide, or 6 cubits, according to the biblical rendering. That would be the perfect place for the south wall of the Holy of Holies. And this area along the western side here, where you can see this balustrade here, or wooden fence built by the Muslims, corresponds perfectly to the western wall, to the inside of the western wall, the 10 feet coming out this way. That wall would be laid along here. And then where the balustrade goes along the northern side of the wall conforms perfectly with the northern wall of the Holy of Holies in Solomon's temple.
And what's fascinating is that it's 3.5 degrees east of true north. It's laid out with that same exact topological alignment.
Parallels the eastern wall.
Parallels the eastern wall right to the 1/2 degree mark. Amazing.
And that makes this rectangular depression here right in the very center of the Holy of Holies.
Wow.
Now, the interesting thing about all of this is that the rectangular depression runs east and west rather than north and south, meaning that the Ark of the Covenant, which, by the way, you see a replica of here behind us, and this is the dimensions that are located on this depression. The very dimensions of this Ark right here are located in this depression on the rock, the es-Sakkra, under the dome of the rock.
Yeah, and we have had this replica built to some kind of scale that we thought was close, and actually this is much closer than we had imagined, based upon what Leen Ritmeyer has discovered on the es-Sakkra.
But instead of the front, or the long view here of the Ark of the Covenant facing the veil,
Yes.
according to this depression, the short side actually faced the veil, and so when the priest would enter, he would have to come around to the side, or to this side, one or the other, in order to sprinkle the blood on the mercy seat of the Ark of the Covenant.
Now we have a scripture in the 8th chapter of 1 Kings that's very, very interesting, talking about the dedication of Solomon's temple, the bringing up of the Ark. 1 Kings 8:6 says, "And the priests brought in the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord into his place, into the oracle of the house, to the most holy place, even under the wings of the cherubims. For the cherubims spread forth their 2 wings over the place of the ark, and the cherubims covered the ark and the staves thereof above, and they drew out the staves, that the ends of the staves were seen out in the holy place before the oracle, and they were not seen without, and there they are unto this day."
Incredible.
So in other words, you couldn't have taken the staves out of the ark if it were turned sideways.
Right.
They were just simply too long.
They would have hit the wall.
They would have hit the wall.
And in fact, the staves were 10 cubits long, and the room was only 20 cubits wide.
J.R., this verse that we read, verse 6 of 1 Kings 8, says that they brought the ark into his place. Now, as you look at the original language of this text, what that's talking about is a place that was prepared for the ark, and it implies a manufactured spot.
Yes. Leen Ritmeyer suggests that there had to be a place hewn out for the Ark of the Covenant to set level, because something so important could not wobble on that rock. It had to have a solid spot for it to set. And that is right in the very center from either side, and exactly in the center from the back wall. And of course the veil of the temple would have run right across here, and there are marks on this rock for all three walls, with the exception of the veil. There's no place there marking the veil.
Now, what's really significant about this fact is that this is the 3,000th anniversary of the bringing of the Ark. 1996 is the 3,000th year. And we now have a notch where the Ark fits, and it locks into its position. J.R., that's significant.
It creates a controversy, of course, a problem for religious Jews who want to rebuild the temple, because Muslims now control that very spot. But with that depression available for all to see, we're going to have some fireworks, I'm afraid, in the near future over who's going to gain that temple spot. It's going to be fascinating to watch. We'll be back in just a moment.